Welcome to MSL Stories. Friends, if you don't mind, please subscribe to my channel. I have a dream of 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. Let's start the story. There was something about the way Amber smiled at me that used to feel like home. She had that kind of smile, the kind that could light up a room and make you believe in everything good about the world. I'd spent the last 13 years building my life around her, our 2 kids, and the future we promised to share. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was ours. The house in the suburbs, weekend barbecues with friends, and the occasional road trip when we could afford it. I thought we were solid, unshakable, but lately something felt off. It wasn't one big moment that tipped me off, more like 1,000 tiny things that didn't add up. Amber's sudden late nights at the office, the quick, suspicious way she locked her phone whenever I walked into the room, even the new perfume she'd started wearing, claiming it was a gift from a colleague. I ignored it for months, chalking up her distance to stress at work or the fatigue of raising 2 kids. I didn't want to be the insecure husband who questioned everything, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave. One day I found myself scrolling through her social media. Not to check up on her, I told myself, just to feel closer to her. That's when I saw it. A photo I hadn't taken. A moment I hadn't shared. Amber, laughing with a man I didn't recognize, holding a drink in one hand and leaning just a little too close to him. The caption was innocuous enough. Great night out with colleagues. But my stomach twisted anyway. I tried to shake it off. People have friends, I told myself. There's no crime in having a social life. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't until a week later when our 8-year-old son Liam said, "Mommy's friend was at the park with us today," that the cracks in our life became impossible to ignore. "Which friend?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "The one with the red car. He said he knows you, but I didn't remember him." A red car. I didn't know anyone in Amber's circle who drove a red car. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral. "That's nice," I said, ruffling Liam's hair. Inside, my mind was racing. That night, after Amber went to bed, I pulled out my laptop. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I needed answers. I signed up for one of those people search websites and typed in the details I knew. Her workplace, her recent calls, anything that might connect her to this mystery man. It didn't take long to find him. Derek, 36, divorced, an IT consultant with a flashy LinkedIn profile and, sure enough, a bright red convertible. His Instagram was public, and it didn't take much scrolling to find a picture of him and Amber at a restaurant I'd never been to. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just the photo, it was the caption. "The best nights are with people who truly get you." The next few weeks were a blur. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed proof, real proof. So I started paying attention. When she said she was working late, I checked her location. When she said she was meeting a friend for coffee, I quietly followed her to see where she'd go. And every time, Derek was there. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was the lies, the manipulation, the way she made me feel like I was crazy for doubting her. I'd given her everything, my trust, my loyalty, my love, and she'd thrown it all away. I knew what I had to do, but I also knew I had to be smart about it. This wasn't just about me. It was about Liam and our 11-year-old daughter, Sophie. They deserved better than a mother who treated our family like a backup plan. And I deserved better than a wife who saw me as an obstacle to her fun. When the day finally came, I was ready. It was our anniversary, a date Amber had always loved to celebrate with grand gestures and elaborate surprises. This year, the surprise would be mine. I didn't need a grand plan. All I needed was the truth, delivered in a way she couldn't wriggle out of. For weeks, I'd been compiling evidence, screenshots of her messages, photos of her with Derek, even the GPS logs showing how often her late nights at work ended at his condo. Every piece was meticulously organized, labeled, and printed. It was a case no one could deny, not even Amber. Our anniversary dinner was at a cozy little restaurant she loved, the kind of place where you could still hear the violinist over the chatter. She showed up in her favorite red dress, a little too cheerful for someone who'd been distant for months. I smiled, played my part, even complimented her on how stunning she looked. The truth was, I felt numb. As we sat across from each other, sharing small talk over appetizers, I couldn't stop my mind from replaying the last few years. How many lies had I swallowed? How many times had she laughed at my trust? My stomach churned, but I kept my expression calm. Tonight wasn't about emotions. It was about clarity and consequences. When the waiter brought dessert, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small gift box. Amber's eyes lit up. "Oh, you didn't have to," she said, her voice dripping with excitement. She probably thought it was jewelry, something expensive to celebrate our years together. "It's something I've been working on for a while," I said, sliding the box across the table. "Go ahead, open it." She tore the ribbon off eagerly, but as soon as she lifted the lid, her smile froze. Inside was a stack of papers, photos of her and Derek, time-stamped locations, and at the very bottom, a printed transcript of a text exchange between them. Her face went pale as she realized what it all meant. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice steady. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if the words had been knocked out of her. When she finally spoke, it was the same tired routine I'd prepared myself for. Denial, anger, deflection. "You went through my private messages?" she spat, her voice low enough not to cause a scene. "Do you have any idea how invasive that is?" I laughed bitterly. "You think that's the problem here? Not the fact that you've been sneaking around with him for God knows how long?" Her face twisted in frustration. "It's not what it looks like. He's just a friend. We talk sometimes, that's all." "Right," I said, pulling out one last piece of evidence. It was a hotel receipt I'd found buried in our bank statements, dated just a few weeks earlier. Her name, his name, and a single night at a luxury hotel. I laid it on the table. "Just friends, huh?" Amber didn't respond. For the first time, I saw something crack in her. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe just the realization that she couldn't lie her way out of this. Either way, she dropped her gaze, suddenly fascinated with her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "Spare me," I said, standing up. "We're done here. Enjoy your dessert." I walked out of the restaurant, leaving her sitting there with the evidence of her betrayal spread out in front of her. I didn't look back. There was no point. Amber had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. Back at home, I started packing my things. I didn't want to uproot Liam and Sophie just yet, but I wasn't about to spend another night under the same roof as Amber. By the time she got home, I had already moved into the guest room and locked the door. She knocked, begged to talk, cried even, but I ignored her. This wasn't a conversation. It was the end of one. Over the next few days, I put the rest of my plan into motion. I contacted a divorce lawyer, one of the best in the city, and laid everything out. The evidence was more than enough to secure primary custody of the kids and protect my assets. Amber didn't see it coming. She'd assumed I'd be too heartbroken or too weak to fight back. She was wrong. The kids were my biggest concern. I didn't want them caught in the crossfire, but they deserved to know the truth, or at least the version of it that wouldn't scar them. I kept it simple. "Mom and I are going to live in different houses, but we both love you very much." They were upset, of course, but they were young enough to adapt. I'd make sure of it. Amber, on the other hand, was unraveling. She tried to save face, even had the audacity to ask if we could work things out. For the kids, I shut her down immediately. "You made your choice, Amber," I told her. "Now you get to live with it." But I wasn't finished yet. Revenge wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about making sure she couldn't rewrite the narrative or pretend she was the victim. I had one last move to make, and it was going to be a masterpiece. Revenge, to me, wasn't about pettiness or rash decisions. It was about ensuring that Amber faced the consequences of her actions, not just with me, but with everyone in her life who had been fooled by her lies. For years, she had played the role of the perfect wife and mother, the dedicated friend and career woman. It was time to show the truth behind the facade. The first step was professional. Amber worked at a small marketing agency where she was well-liked, charming, driven, and always quick with a joke. But what most people didn't know was that Derek was one of her clients. A married client, as I discovered after a bit of digging. I wasn't going to out her to her boss. That would have been petty. Instead, I compiled all the evidence of their relationship. The photos, the texts, even a recording of Amber admitting to the affair during one of her desperate late-night apologies. Then I mailed it anonymously to Derek's wife. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Derek's wife, who had clearly suspected something, was furious. She confronted him at his workplace, causing a scene that had half the office talking. Word spread quickly, and soon it wasn't just Derek's wife who knew. Amber's colleagues began whispering, questioning how ethical it was for her to be involved with a client. Her reputation, carefully crafted over years, began to crumble. But I wasn't done. The second step was social. Amber loved her image, the smiling photos on Facebook, the curated Instagram posts of our happy family, the likes and comments that validated her. I took control of the narrative. I didn't post anything inflammatory or cruel. I simply changed my status to divorced and removed every trace of her from my accounts. I knew people would ask questions, and I made sure the answers they got were clear and factual. It's unfortunate, I'd say, but Amber wasn't faithful. I tried to handle it privately, but she made her choices. As expected, people took sides. Some of her friends rallied around her, but others were shocked. They reached out to me, asking for the full story. I kept my responses short and polite, but the evidence I provided spoke volumes. Slowly, the picture of Amber as the innocent victim began to fade. Then came the final step: financial. Amber had always been careless with money, and during our marriage, I'd taken on most of the financial responsibilities. This gave me the upper hand. With the help of my lawyer, I ensured the divorce settlement was airtight. She walked away with less than she'd expected, while I retained the house and primary custody of the kids. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting what mattered to me. But there was one more card to play. The kids were my priority, and I wanted them to see through the lies Amber might try to tell them. I didn't want to poison their minds or turn them against her. That wasn't my style. Instead, I focused on being the best father I could be. I enrolled them in activities, spent more time with them, and made sure they felt safe and loved. They started to notice the difference. "Why doesn't Mom pick us up anymore?" Liam asked one day. "She's busy," I said simply. But he saw the look on my face, and I knew he understood more than I realized. As Amber's world unraveled, mine began to rebuild. The divorce was finalized within months, and I found a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I started focusing on myself for the first time in a long time, working out, picking up old hobbies, even reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. It wasn't about proving anything to Amber. It was about proving something to myself. But Amber wasn't done trying to claw her way back. She called me one night, her voice shaky. "We could have worked it out," she said. "For the kids. For us." I laughed, not out of cruelty, but because it was absurd. "Amber," I said, "you didn't just cheat on me. You betrayed everything we built. There's no going back from that." She didn't respond, and I hung up. That was the last time I let her voice linger in my life. Derek, on the other hand, got his own dose of karma. His wife filed for divorce, took half of his assets, and moved to another state with their kids. Amber, now jobless and ostracized by most of her friends, tried to contact him, but he ghosted her. Whatever fantasy she'd built around their relationship crumbled as quickly as our marriage had. For the first time in years, I felt free. The house was quieter, but it was a peaceful quiet. The kids adjusted faster than I expected, and we began to create a new kind of normal. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't about Amber's downfall. It was about my own rise. The first few weeks after the divorce were a whirlwind of change. The house, once filled with tension and unspoken words, began to feel like a sanctuary. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and got rid of anything that reminded me of Amber's deceit. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about reclaiming my space and making it my own. The kids, to my relief, adjusted better than I could have hoped. Sophie, now 11, took to journaling and drawing as a way to process everything. Liam, on the other hand, just wanted more time with me. We'd spend weekends building forts in the living room, going on bike rides, or cooking disastrous but fun meals together. "Dad, you're a better cook than Mom," he said once. And while I laughed it off, the comment stuck with me. They were seeing the difference, even if I didn't spell it out. Amber tried to insert herself into our lives at first, but it was clear she didn't have the time or energy to keep up appearances. She'd show up late for visits, cancel plans at the last minute, and make excuses when the kids asked for more time with her. It broke my heart to see them disappointed, but I refused to let her inconsistency define their happiness. Instead, I doubled down on being present, creating a stable foundation they could rely on. As for me, healing came in unexpected ways. I joined a local gym, not because I wanted to reinvent myself, but because I needed an outlet for the anger and frustration I'd been carrying. It started with small steps, a treadmill here, a weight machine there, but as the weeks passed, I noticed the changes, not just in my body, but in my mind. The workouts gave me clarity, focus, and a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. I also reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen much of since Amber and I got together. One of them, Nate, became my unofficial support system. He'd been through a rough divorce himself a few years earlier, and his advice was blunt but invaluable. "You've got a second chance, man," he said one night over beers. "Don't waste it trying to understand her. Just focus on what makes you happy." So that's what I did. One of the biggest surprises came from an unlikely place: the parents at Sophie's dance class. I'd always been the dad who stood in the corner, scrolling on his phone while Amber handled the socializing. But now, with Amber out of the picture, I found myself stepping up. I volunteered to help with events, chatted with other parents, and even joined the carpool rotation. It wasn't long before I caught the attention of Emily, a single mom whose daughter Chloe was in Sophie's class. Emily wasn't flashy or overly outgoing. She was warm, kind, and easy to talk to. We started with casual conversations in the parking lot, but those turned into coffee runs during practice, then dinner with the kids after recitals. She never pried into my past, and I didn't ask about hers. We were just two people finding solace in each other's company. Meanwhile, Amber's life continued to unravel. Word of her affair had spread through our social circles, and her once tight-knit group of friends had dwindled. Derek had cut ties completely, leaving her isolated and struggling to find her footing. She reached out to me a few times, asking for help or trying to rekindle some semblance of a friendship. I was polite but firm. "Our only connection now is the kids," I told her. "Anything else is a closed chapter." As satisfying as it was to see Amber face the consequences of her actions, I didn't dwell on her downfall. My focus was on moving forward. The kids and I started new traditions: Friday movie nights, Sunday hikes, and an annual summer road trip. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but in many ways, it was better. It was ours. One evening, as I was tucking Liam into bed, he looked up at me and said, "I'm glad we're happy again, Dad." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. For so long, I'd been consumed by anger, regret, and the need for revenge. But in that moment, I realized something profound. My happiness wasn't tied to Amber's choices. It was tied to the life I was building now. Emily became a bigger part of that life. What started as casual dinners turned into weekend outings, then late-night conversations after the kids went to bed. She wasn't a replacement for Amber. She was something entirely different. With her, I felt seen and valued in a way I hadn't in years. And the best part? She adored Sophie and Liam, treating them like her own. Amber's visits became less frequent over time. The kids noticed, of course, but they didn't seem as affected as I'd feared. "Mom loves us," Sophie said once, "but she's just not good at showing it." It was a bittersweet truth, one I didn't argue with. I couldn't change who Amber was, but I could change how her absence affected us. By the time the first anniversary of our divorce rolled around, life felt unrecognizable, and in the best way. The house was filled with laughter again. The kids were thriving, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself. But there was one last thing I needed to do. It was early spring when I decided to tie up the last loose end. Closure wasn't just about letting go. It was about making sure the past no longer had any hold over me or the life I was building. Amber still had a few belongings stored in the basement, boxes of things she never bothered to pick up after the divorce. I had left them untouched, not out of sentimentality, but because dealing with them felt like opening a door I'd already closed. But now, with the house fully ours and my life firmly on track, it was time to deal with the remnants of what she left behind. The boxes were mostly filled with old clothes, photo albums, and random trinkets. I sorted through them carefully, setting aside anything the kids might want one day. A few items, like their baby photos and Amber's keepsakes from their school years, I kept for them. Everything else, the designer shoes, the jewelry she once flaunted, and the mementos of her old life, went into donation bags or the trash. It was oddly therapeutic, watching the physical evidence of her presence in my life disappear. One box caught my attention. It was heavier than the others, filled with documents and old papers. At first, I thought it was just tax forms and receipts, but buried at the bottom, I found something I hadn't expected: a small notebook crammed with pages of Amber's handwriting. Curiosity got the better of me, and I sat down to read it. It wasn't a diary exactly, but a collection of thoughts, to-do lists, and what appeared to be plans for her future, plans that didn't include me or the kids. There were notes about Derek, entries detailing how she'd hidden her affair, and even a few lines about how she felt stuck in our marriage but didn't want to leave because it would look bad. It was painful to read, but it also gave me the last bit of clarity I needed. Amber hadn't just betrayed me. She had built an entire life of deception, all while pretending to care. I didn't confront her about the notebook. There was no point. Instead, I shredded it, watching as her secret world turned into confetti. It felt like the final act of closure, the last piece of the puzzle falling into place. With Amber fully out of my life, I focused on building something new. My relationship with Emily grew stronger by the day. She was patient, kind, and endlessly supportive, not just of me, but of Sophie and Liam as well. The kids adored her, and I could see the difference she made in their lives. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't just about survival, but about joy. Meanwhile, Amber's visits became rare and sporadic. She still called occasionally, but her voice always carried a note of defeat. The vibrant, confident woman I once knew was now a shadow of herself, and while part of me felt pity, I couldn't allow it to linger. She had made her choices, and so had I. The turning point came one sunny afternoon, almost a year after the divorce. Sophie had a dance recital, and both Amber and Emily were in the audience. It was the first time they'd been in the same room since the divorce, and the tension was palpable. Amber sat at the back, alone and quiet, while Emily was up front with me, cheering Sophie on. After the recital, Liam ran to Emily, not Amber, and Sophie followed suit. Amber stood there, watching from a distance, her expression unreadable. When we got home that evening, Sophie asked, "Do you think Mom's happy?" It was a question I hadn't expected, and for a moment I didn't know how to answer. Finally, I said, "I don't know, sweetheart, but we're happy, and that's what matters." And we were. In the months that followed, our lives flourished. I proposed to Emily during a quiet evening at home, with Sophie and Liam in on the surprise. She said yes, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had something to look forward to, a future filled with love, laughter, and a family that truly cared for one another. Amber, on the other hand, faded into the background. She moved to another city, trying to start over, but her relationship with the kids remained distant. They visited her occasionally, but their lives were firmly rooted with me and Emily. And while I didn't wish her ill, I didn't miss her either. She was a chapter I had closed, a lesson I had learned, and a part of my life I would never revisit. In the end, revenge wasn't about destroying Amber. It was about reclaiming my happiness and ensuring that the people who mattered most, my kids and myself, were free to thrive. And as I stood in my backyard one sunny afternoon, watching Sophie and Liam chase each other around while Emily laughed beside me, I realized I had won, not through anger or spite, but through resilience and love. This was my life now, and it was better than I ever could have imagined. Thank you, friends.